Introverted leaders. Can you be a successful leader if you are introverted? What are myths around introverted people? What qualities they have? And maybe what cons they have that's stopping them from reaching their potential? Yuen, have we got tips for success?
Of course.
Let's discuss together. My name is Mike.
It's Yuen.
Welcome to the Imperfect Clinician.
Many people associate leadership with extroversion. If you are an introvert and you think you can't be a leader, think again, because research suggests otherwise, as good leadership comes in a variety of personality types.
Yeah, according to various reports, it's estimated that there are between 30 to 56% of introverts of the world population, and even up to 70% of CEOs describes themselves as introverts, which is quite significant and I think stands in opposition to a popular belief.
So how would you see the difference between an introvert and an extrovert?
Let's start with the fact that very rarely you would be in an extreme spectrum, in an extreme sort of case. It is a spectrum of behaviors that may lead you to believe that you are more extra or introverted, okay? But let's talk about like typical idea of introverted people and extroverts as well, okay? So one of the way to describe people's energy as intro and extroverts is by how they are charging their batteries. Usually extroverts are people who gain energy by working or being around people, and they thrive when there is attention, when there are people who are participating in the conversation, in the situation in general, and that's what sort of drives them. That's the initial response they get, is the buzz of being there, being surrounded by people, making an impact, okay? And it doesn't mean that they may feel that they're, I don't know, better than everybody else. It's how they gain the energy. That's what wakes them up. It's a bit like people, meeting people or seeing people in the morning or whenever. It's like having a coffee that gives you that sort of buzz, that drive, and it opens you to new ideas, and you start to understand that, you know, all of a sudden, right, the world is an oyster and I can do whatever I like. So that's the way to describe the extroverts very often. Whereas when it comes to introverts, those people gain their energy by staying away from people, and they charge them on their own. And they very often can entertain themselves very well without participation of others. And that's where they, I wouldn't say necessarily thrive as such, but that's where they feel most comfortable and most at peace with themselves. And any or some of the, or good part of the interactions with others will drain this energy. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad at it, that they are, you know, not getting on well within the conversation or within the social interactions, but that drains them. That makes people tired, and they need the time on their own to recharge those batteries. So I think this is the definition that's closest to the feel definition that I recognize myself.
Yeah. I'm curious why then leaders are portrayed in various ways being extroverted. What do you think, is there any reason behind the misconception?
I think one part of it is that we see the leaders only to some extent, okay? I think that it's down to the fact that we see the leaders of big organizations, big companies, and being decisive, being open, out in the public light and everything else, whereas it might be just a very small proportion of what they actually do. And one of the reasons why the misconception is still common is due to unconscious bias. So unconscious bias could be described as like social stereotypes about certain groups of people. So you portray people in a certain light. You expect, I don't know, the boss of the very big company to be open, people's person and being persuasive and confident and everything else, because that's how they may come across during short clips somewhere on YouTube or somewhere on the TV, whereas actually this might be just a very small piece of how they are. And it doesn't represent the true reflection. But this is what catches the limelight. This is what comes across as the personality. And it's not always the case. There is plenty of example of people who we might consider to be extroverts who actually are not. For example, Barack Obama, for example, Mahatma Gandhi, for example, Warren Buffett, for example, Oprah Winfrey, and Albert Einstein. They might be considered as people who are extroverted, but they actually would describe, most likely, in most cases, them as introverts.
It feels like there are myths surrounding leaders, because it feels like leaders should be risk takers, or in some ways, perhaps extroverted leaders are more preferred, like you say, in some ways portrayed in the media in different ways. So there might be myths that leaders should be risk takers, extremely sociable, expert networker, would you say, being eloquent, taking charge, perhaps expected to work well with a lot of people, being very assertive, decisive, and command attention.
Yeah, I think that this is a fair description of the general idea. But if you look really closely in all those, myths, you can see that those characteristics could potentially describe also people who are introverts. I mean, there are people who are introverted who are quite good and quite capable in social situations. It may drain their energy, it may drain their sort of life juice, yeah, but they still can do it very well.
And I guess the society's expectation of introvert perhaps is somebody who's relatively quiet, who is shy, perhaps not really voicing their opinion.
But in the modern world where you have so much information, and as we mentioned before in one of the episodes with the living in a microwave society, we are sort of led to believe that, faster is good, that the interaction, that immediacy of people's connection is good, that louder is better, that expressive is best. This is what the general consensus of pop culture is all about, without looking into the details. Because if you start disassembling those characteristics, you start to understand that some of those descriptions or qualities may be result of, for example, introverts trying to fit in, trying to be like others, to maybe not necessarily show their true colors in a way, but potentially trying to fit in, trying to present themselves as people who can be like everybody else. Because if we assume that extrovert is a norm, because that's what modern society leads us to believe, that this is sort of the norm and this is how everybody is supposed to be. It says, I'm a chatty person, so everybody should be chatty,
Plus, there is also the society's positive connotation around extroversion. Someone who speaks, raise their hand in class, perhaps somebody who is outspoken, somebody who joins in the discussion regularly, someone who enjoys being the center of attention. That seemed to be something of a strength. Whereas when you hear the comment, I'm sorry he or she's a bit shy, or I'm sorry he or she's a bit quiet, it doesn't have the same level of impact or different level of judgment for introversion versus extroversion.
Well, and there are some, I think, professions probably which attract certain kind of people. And there are certain qualities that we sort of trust when we're going to speak to someone. If you have a state agent who is very introverted and doesn't really like interaction with people, that's not really the most welcoming. I mean, I would be inclined to trust these people more, but you won't see a lot of them amongst the estate agents, I would imagine. My idea of a estate agent is the person who is really, good with building networking, building connection, building relationship in the very, confident and very people-friendly way.
So is this then part of your unconscious bias about estate agents in general?
Absolutely, yeah, because you would expect, it's like with the sellers, in general, people who sell things, you don't want them to be quiet, reserved and withdrawn, because you would not necessarily sell a lot. I mean, that's what I think, that some professions attract different people. Whereas, people can learn the skills. It might be not the best idea for them because it might be just simply draining. So can introverts be a people person?
Yes, definitely. So when I talk about this, I'll come back to your estate agent comment. I feel extroverts come alive when it is a cause that they believe in. So for example, Rosa Parks, known as the mother of civil rights movement, she's a reserved and quiet introvert. And if introverts step into an area where it's something that they are passionate in, they strongly believe in, all of a sudden the presentation would be different. So I feel that introverts are more selective in terms of the area that they choose and in the area that they speak.
Well, I know that it's not the world's best kept secret that you're an introvert. So what is your experience?
So people around me are actually quite surprised when I told them that I am an introvert, because they would say, "Oh, but you're constantly doing speaking events. You're constantly speaking to groups of people. I'm surprised that you say that you are an introvert." And so I need to start from my own misconception about leaders as well. It's the same thing, because I grew up being exposed to the media and perhaps biases and the positive connotation of being outspoken. I was outspoken in the areas that I wanted to, and the areas where I don't really see a point, I wouldn't. So when I wanted to be more involved in the leadership position, initially I felt that I had to, like you said, to fit into the mold and to be part of the secret code of such. If you want to be leader, it feels like you need to have similar qualities. And when I was trying to do that, it really didn't work. It didn't click with me. It was very draining for me. So then I learned to accept who I am, in terms of I'm trying to understand what are my strengths and where can I tap into. So what are the things I'm better than others, and what are my superpowers, essentially. And I know everyone has their own. If you're not sure which one, spend time to find out within yourself. And when I started doing that, I realized, right, I've got the ability to connect to people. I've got the ability for people to open up, and I have the ability to galvanize people and influence.
But I think it also comes from the qualities that you have as an introverted person, because you are a good listener. And,
yes.
And that usually happens to be a trait of people who are introverted.
Yes, definitely. And when I found my own niche, in a way, I then tried to polish that skill in many different ways. And when I know my purpose, when I know what are my values, when I know what drives me and what are my passion, when I step into those situations where I need to speak to a big crowd of people, Sometimes I feel, still get a little bit nervous, but it's a sign that I care about the topic that I'm talking about. And because I'm stepping to an area where I'm really passionate about, it doesn't feel like I am going against my grain. Does it make sense?
I think it does. I mean, as long as it does make sense to you, that's the most important, I guess.
I feel like I am stepping into my power.
Yeah, you're stepping into your power, but this is where we were talking, about this fitting in. Would it be a positive case for fitting in? For people who are trying to go outside of their comfort zone to reach the others, for example?
So when I tried to fit in, that didn't work. And it changes when I completely accepted who I am and then created that sense of belonging where I accept myself for who I am and also accepting the people around me for who they are. And we're going on a journey together in terms of the team or the organization. Whoever that steps into my room, whichever talk that I'm doing, it's instead of me telling them what to do, is us learning from each other.
Fair enough. And shall we have a quick detour and talk about the chameleons of people who are in between? Ambiverts, or people who sometimes are described as centroverts? Because I initially thought of myself, and I love people and I gain a lot of energy when I'm interacting with others, and I feel like this is my strength because I really love people. I love being around people, with people, and for the people. But then I also noticed that I do feel quite comfortable on my own as well. And I, in fact, generate quite a lot of positive energy when I can recharge just on my own or by myself. So that led me to believe that maybe I'm not that 100% extrovert that I always anticipated. I think that I would class myself probably with the maybe not strong, but with a dominant of extrovert myself, but I would go somewhere towards the centrovert or ambivert, if you want to call it.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I said it's very hard to be 100% because if you are completely 100% of one end of the spectrum or the other, it gives you very little flexibility and it might affect your daily activity. I think it's important for you and for us as well to discuss the benefits of introverted leaders, because when I talk about strengths that I've tapped into, this is relatively common in introverts, and understanding that these are your strengths instead of trying to be something that you are not.
Absolutely. I think that the introverted leaders and introverted people in general have got lots of qualities that can be an added value, and sometimes people don't quite realize their potential. Would you say that introverts are very often considered as underselling themselves, whereas extroverts are trying to oversell the lack of skills that they might have, or trying to, portray it in a better light than it actually is?
I want to say yes to the general statement, but in terms of underselling or overselling, I think introverts perhaps don't really enjoy the limelight as much. So they might let others take credit, even though the credit's due to them. So they can be relatively humble, but in one way or another, it affects their progression because the managers or the leaders might only see, or first of all, see the people who are louder.
Yeah, more noticeable.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go on to those benefits of introverted leaders. Would you say that creativity is one of them?
Yes, definitely. I feel that introverts have the ability of out-of-the-box thinking, and also has, like you said, the listening skills. So because we take into account all parties involved and then allow for some quiet reflection, introverts tend to allow themselves time to think before actually deciding on something. So it's more of a risk and benefits measure, but by taking into account everybody. So not much of a rushed decision or let's just get it done now.
Yeah, I also would put into that mix being more methodical and deliberate, because that is sort of connected to assessing the risks carefully before taking them.
Yeah.
And that leads then to making decision with certainty, and it's usually quite oriented or embedded in details, I would say.
I agree. I think communication is also one of them, because introverts choose their moment to speak wisely. They're not just speaking about the first thought that popped into their head, saying only important things after considering multiple options.
Would you say that's why they listen more?
Yeah, so that's why they come across as more of a listener, and perhaps they also choose their communication methods thoughtfully, whether it's in a written format or within a smaller group.
Yeah, I think these days when it comes to communication method, not everything has to be direct in the eye, conversation. There is plenty of other ways that we could make ourselves heard within the groups, teams, organizations.
Yeah, and I think because the communication methods are done more mindfully and there are more engagement with the team, there is also more trust building, so more one-to-one, because it's a smaller group where introverts might feel more comfortable and people in the team might feel more that they're able to build more meaningful and trusting relationships.
I think with regards to this relationship, the thing that you mentioned earlier, that listening, that leads to stronger bonds.
Yes.
Because people like, want, and need to be listened to. I think that's quite an important part of it. Also, I would put into this list here that we are trying to put together, problem solving, because people who are introverted seem to be a little bit more consistent when it comes to persisting until the solution is found. So there was a mention that Albert Einstein said, it's not that I'm so smart, it's that I stayed with the problem longer, because it gives them time for reflection and going into the details that we mentioned before.
Yeah, and also perhaps tap into their creativity skills to try different ways of managing the problem. We mentioned about listening to others and communicating clearly. I think with that, introverts are also team enabler in a way, because they're allowing others to shine by not dominating meetings, and they're encouraging others to come up with ideas and empowering them. So one way or another, they are promoting a more proactive culture.
But this works, in my opinion, where they don't have ambition to be, let's generalize here, but like extroverts, that they want to take the credit for it. If they are quite happy to be behind, to play, the background, that's what's going to give them fulfillment as such, because they're doing it for themselves and not necessarily to be up on the front, or people who want to shine despite being introverts. I think that if they assume the role of being the creative power and not necessarily the visible power, that's going to bring them happiness. And I think this is where they shine better, if they find them true belonging, rather than to try to fit in and override, all the other extroverts, for example.
I agree, and I want to clarify that we're not saying introvert. It's not an introverts versus extroverts conversation. We're not saying introverts are better, but we're saying introverts have got those potential skill set that can make them a really good leader.
Just as good as anybody else, absolutely.
Yes, so do not exclude them from leadership position. And perhaps you are thinking about stepping up, but you think, oh, can I? Am I able to? But I don't fit the usual mold. Think again.
Absolutely.
I feel introverted leaders also remain calm during crisis, because they can manage uncertainty with all the skills that we've mentioned above, with the communication. Cool head, yeah. And in some ways, internalizing it instead of externalizing it, where they are worried, but they're showing it, and then that creates a ripple effect where everyone else is worried as well.
Very good. And there is, regarding the communication and what you mentioned earlier, there is this conclusion that introverts listen when others speak, and people listen when introverts speak.
Yeah, because they don't speak very frequently, so usually
They make it count.
Yes.
Not like me blabbing all the time, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't have a lot of, or maybe there is some merit in it, but some of it is just very often fluff.
I want to say, in your situation, it's really quite helpful in social settings. I tend to have deep, meaningful conversations, but not frequently. I find more surface conversation quite draining for me, and in that way you compliment me, so I can leave that to you, and then when it comes to the more deep,
but
meaningful
do have deeper conversations.
Yeah, I know you do as well, but what I'm trying to say is, other than deep, meaningful conversation, you can manage those day-to-day, more surface level conversation. It doesn't drain you. Social chores, the HR side of things that you have to do one way or another. So we talked about the benefits of introverts. Let's talk about potential qualities that might hold introverts back. What do you think?
Okay, so when we're talking about the cons of being introvert, or potential cons, I mean, there is always, any con is opportunity for improvement and for working on it. Once you realize that, then you can do something about them. I think one of them is staying in the comfort zone. That very often there is no drive or push to move yourself outside of a comfort zone, to do something new.
Can I say, besides no drive or push, I think it might more likely to be due to fear, the fear of the unknown, the uncertainty.
And also lack of opportunity.
Maybe there are opportunities, but the fact that you're stepping into something unknown might discourage introverts to try it.
Potentially. What about not being noticed to be promoted? We touched on it.
We touched on it briefly, didn't we? Because it might be that introverts are quite happy to hand over the credit, or it might be that they're not as visible as other extroverted colleagues. They're not being noticed to be promoted. So making sure that you're making yourself visible to the managers. And I guess if you are a manager listening to this, open your eyes up to people that are, inverted commas, quieter, and look at the quality of work, not the amount of sound that they make.
That's the thing. The quality and the outcomes should be most noticeable, and this is the responsibility really of leaders to identify that and to promote the quality over noise that the work is generating.
Yes, and besides the output that you've mentioned, I would suggest looking within a team to see who are in some ways the positivity injector, and people who knows how to support different people in the group mindfully in perhaps more individual way. And when you see a team or an organization, you tend to have glues, people like that, and they're usually more introverts because they're more in tune with other people's emotions. I think also because when you're at work, there is a big chance that introverts will be working with extroverts. There might be certain clashes because extroverts might want answers straight away, while introverts might need time to think. And so making sure that the need for each team members are being taken into account when you're planning a project or when you're setting deadlines, for example. So we've put together 9 tips to succeed as introverted leaders.
We didn't want to make 10 commandments. 9 is a good number.
So the first one is accepting who you are and tap into your personality strengths.
Yeah, to realize your traits, that how you are is valuable.
Yes, because introverts need solitude to recharge, making sure that you set time aside. So, balancing your time or blocking time out in your calendar to make sure that you're not overstretched.
Okay, so apart from accepting who you are, setting aside time to recharge, the third one would be think out loud. So be clear about your thought process and articulate it to others. Essentially, speak up.
Yeah, because perhaps a lot of the thought process happens in your head and people around you can't hear it. And whilst you're taking time to process it, if you can articulate it with others, it's more likely that others will come with you with that journey and they can support you wherever you are. The active listening skill is one of the biggest traits for introverts. Use that to your advantage. The next one would be give and receive feedback.
Yeah, it's important to ensure that you are listened to and that you pay attention to what's happening around you so that you have an opinion on it.
Agreed.
The next number, I think it might be number 6, network with purpose. So by using ability to form connections, because introverts have an amazing ability to listen and build this one-to-one connection and are trustworthy, the network with a purpose and not just for the sake of networking could be a really big strength, and it could really be meaningful and fulfilling.
Number 7, step out of your comfort zone. It's easy to stay within it because that's what is called comfort zone for a reason. But for you to learn and grow, you need to be happy to challenge yourself further.
Number 8 would be to communicate clearly, to make sure that what we say is concise and meaningful.
And number 9, build relationship and trust. This is how you would gather people around you, and this is how you would make change happen, because nothing can be done single-handedly.
Yeah, so when we are now talking about people who are introverts or introverted leaders, we started to realize that it's not actually the extroversion that is the most important driver of leadership perception, but actually it's the communication. It's how we say, when we say, what we say, and to who we say that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a constant, stream of meaningless conversations. It just has to be on point and important.
Agreed. I
Thought
think
through.
superior communication has advantage of leadership potential, regardless of whether there are introverts, extroverts, or ambiverts. And communication's one of the crucial skill set. Other leadership skills that are beneficial that we've mentioned in our previous episodes are focusing on team health, setting culture, how to bring out the best in others, and more importantly, to be inspiring and motivating.
So if you're an introvert, listen to yourself. You have something to say. And I am sure that if you push yourself out of the comfort zone, people who are around you will listen more carefully. And you are an extrovert, remember that you have absolutely the same strengths to engage with others. Just need to make sure that there is a balance between people who are more open in expressing themselves and those who initially may need more time to process their thoughts and are not necessarily shouting and screaming about it.
Let us know your thoughts and your opinions, and perhaps share your experience, whether you've worked with introverts or extroverts, and perhaps which one do you prefer?
Just one last thing before we finish. Do you think that cooperation of extroverts and introverts can be the perfect combination?
I want to say yes, because we're looking at diversity on the table. So you need to have people who think in different perspectives. Extroverts, introverts, ambiverts needs to come together.
and not kill each other in the process. Okay, we will see you next week. And after this, we go straight into Yuen Reads. And until then, thank you very much for staying with us. Bye-bye. It's about time for Yuen Reads.
Melinda Gates, The Moment of Lift. This is a crucial book. It is about gender equity. It is about listening. It is about courage. It is about community, connection, and inclusion. It is about us, all of us, uniting for a better world. Her storytelling is so compelling and made me reflect on how I speak and act as a parent, leader, and daughter. I think this is a must read for me and for everyone out there, regardless of gender, because it is an absolute eye-opener what is needed in our society today.
Thank you for listening to the Imperfect Clinician podcast.
Grow and learn with us using our experience and flaws, just like we'd learn every day about ourselves. The best way to support us is to hit that follow or subscribe button. Thanks for your participation in our socials. We take to heart the ratings, reviews, and comments.
The best way we can repay you is by making this podcast better and by reaching and inspiring more people like you, like us. Until next time.